This morning, I'm going to share with you a lesson that's near and dear to my heart that I'm sure you're going to take away and say, that's the most exciting thing I've ever heard. It's a survey of the genealogies of the Bible. Nervous laughter out there. No, about a month ago, Ken came up to me and said, I'm going to be gone on the 20th. And would you fill in for me? And I'm thinking, I've got a bunch of titles out there I want to do. And before I could think of one, Ken says, what you're going to speak on is shaped by suffering. I don't know if I'm a fill-in teacher or part of a book promotion, but we're going to be doing Shaped by Suffering. I will lay claim to having the subtitle that came to me immediately because this is easy to talk about. This is my lived experience here. Shaped by Suffering, the power of humility, community, and gratitude. And this morning, I hope you can come to realize how these three are so intertwined, and one feeds into the next one, and then that next one goes back and informs the first one. And it really came together quite organically. And just some things about where I'm coming from. Starting in January of 2022, I'm not that old, I've had a lot thrown at me. I came out of COVID, went to my doctor after a 2 years absence, and found that I had incurable stage 4 prostate cancer. And prostate cancer is generally assumed to be something that you can survive. It's said that you'll die of something else before you'll die of the prostate cancer. But I got to say, it's sobering when the doctor's sitting there, and you know surgeons, they don't beat around the bush. There's no hand holding, no smoothing out stuff. They just deliver. Yeah, you've got stage 4 incurable cancer. Boom. I got my next appointment. So I was in a little bit of a state of shock, but proceeded throughout that year. I'm still in treatment, and I'll get to where I am currently shortly. And then in May, I saw my mother lose her struggle with Alzheimer's. And for those who have gone through that with a loved one, the last time I drove up to Chattanooga to see her, I went into her room. And I don't know if you can see this, but all she could do was move her right hand about half an inch. And as I'm standing there, the thought occurred to me that she probably does not recognize me, and I might well be viewed by her as a threat. So I said my goodbyes quickly and left there. My last encounter with my mother was about a minute and a half. And just to put the cherry on top, December, I woke up one morning and I had floaters in the left eye, and a quick call to my brother who's in medical sales, which means he thinks he's a doctor, although he's certainly not, told me that this is something that could render you blind within hours or days. That got my attention if it did not get the attention of Kaiser's insurance folks. So I went through that, and fortunately, for better or worse, 2023, I haven't had anything new crop up. I've had a little revisiting of the past, which I'll go through here shortly, where I twice now have had very aggravating relapses into the side effects from I had 39 sessions of radiation, which went through so smoothly. And now it is, I've shared with Chuck, if I get a troubled look on my face and dash out of here, it's not stage fright. And don't get my way as I head back to the restroom there, but I think I can make it for an hour here. But this morning I reflect how during the course of these events, very early on and very naturally, I found myself saying to folks, I have fallen in love with life. I have fallen in love with life. with the cancer, with Alzheimer's, with the threat of the loss of sight. And you might very well ask, as I did, why? Why would you say this? How? How could you say this in the face of all that you are going through? And so I am here to try to unpack that. And I want to make it known to you that this morning I'm here to share my story with the hope, as I've found out in this, that when I share, I'm able to help others even as others are coming to me and helping me. So this morning's comments are intended to help you guys. I've been here since '92, have come to know and love a lot of you guys out there. And I'm aware that I'm far from the only one with any challenges, but I want us to conceive of this as walking together. And I want to make it sure that this is not a must-do list. This is not I actually got ordained April 9th of last year. This is not a pastoral missive on what you must do, the correct way of doing this. Instead, it's a personal story offered in the hope of collective healing, of community building. And I want to say from the top, and I'm going to say it again when I reach the conclusion of my remarks, I felt it on my heart to tell everyone here, whatever you're going through, or if you're going through nothing, that you are loved and you are not alone. Because that experience in my various communities, this is certainly foremost among them. I'm, again, been here for a long time. That sense of community, of love and acceptance, having a place to be, has been integral to my getting through this, what is now a very aggravating mess. So, let's get it on. I said humility, so let's start with humility. When I first was diagnosed with this, I don't know how one of the staff ministers at Peachtree Road got hold of the information, but within a day or two, Jeff Beakley calls up and says, "Sorry to hear this, and I think the one thing you've got to do is share it with your guys." And I serve, that's the language I use. I serve the Friday men's morning ministry. And I was thinking at that point, it was still kind of a shock, and I wanted to deal with it on my own accord. But he says, "I think it would be important for you to share it with those prayer warriors. I know if I had those guys on my side, they're the first ones I'd recruit into telling this story and helping them help me by shouldering the burdens." So with the encouragement of the ministerial staff at Peachtree Road, I was pretty open, and I felt very guilty. In that Friday group, we've got one fellow who's on his second round of a brain cancer. At the time, we had one of the men had spots on his lung that had shown up. He's since turned out to be negative as for cancer. But there's always somebody with a bigger and greater need out there. But my basic tenet, having taught and been involved with Bible study, you hear these things I started in 2002, is that pain and suffering is not a competitive sport. Pain and everybody's, how many times have I heard from somebody I know they mean it in all the best of intentions. Two things that really make me go, yeah. One is, it could be worse. And at least you're alive. These are not of terrible comfort. So I try to communicate that we don't compare pain and suffering. What is being endured by a person is unique to them, and it is actually not all horrible. There have been some pretty lighthearted moments. I was too far along for surgery. The doctor says, "I don't want to get in there and you wake up with a colostomy bag and a catheter." And I said, "Good call. You're my surgeon." So it was too far along for surgery, which left me with the option of radiation coupled with a systemic treatment, and that being because some of these critters got out into 5 lesions in my pelvic cage and my spine. So somewhere there was a jailbreak. They started treating me for that with hormone therapy. And guess what prostate cancer feeds on? No jokes on me over this. Testosterone. So for the last year and a half, I've had these 3 regimens that have been stripping testosterone out of my body. And I was sharing this early on in a testimonial, and this woman in the back says, "Hey, I know what you are. You're a menopausal woman." And I shared that with my radiation team, and Michelle says, "Oh, I bet that's right. I bet you're very emotional. Do you cry at commercials?" And I said, "Only the ones with puppies." So it's not all horrible, and there are worse things out there. And over the year and a half, I've learned to put aside my concerns and to not worry about feeling worthy to come before a group and say, here's what I'm going through. And again, this is not my recommendations. This is a distinctively personal story, what I've experienced and how it has helped me. The first thing, I've progressed. Last year was every few months was a new thing. Now, I don't worry about new things. I got the same old thing. I got out and I'd had such an easy treatment regimen. The radiation therapy went so smooth. And the doctor says, you were smooth through the radiation. You should be smooth through the recovery. Because, they're basically bombarding you and burning up tissue. And for the first month and a half, I was great. I had Gemtesa, my sainted drug for the overactive bladder. And then I ran out of that, and Kaiser says, well, gosh, this thing that gives you so much relief, it's not in our formulary. And I had to go 3 different drugs in the Kaiser formulary, none of which worked, and one of which turned my urine orange. And you can imagine if I have a little accident, what that was like. Try getting out of a restaurant from the restroom to the door and not have anybody look down there. And I went beside the bar where the people are up in high chairs, and I made contact. Look up here, look up here. You get quite creative when you got stuff like that going on, but it is constantly urgency, frequency, and pain. All these months later, and some of the radiation scars have still not healed. So my reward at the end of all this very frequent trips to the restroom is look down there and see blood. And it's not any more painful, but I got to tell you, that'll get your attention. So I would say that I would put up with the frequency and the pain any day if I could just escape the urgency, because that is very difficult to deal with. And how difficult? Well, at the end of the day, and I look around, and it's the same here as it is with my church. We got a lot of type A personalities, accomplished, and you're used to being in charge, but you're not. The most basic functions of being human are oftentimes just simply out of your control. And I'm also an attorney in addition to being a minister. And this condition of mine offers special challenges. So if I go to a new court, the first thing I do after I find out where the restroom is I go to the bailiff. And I said, if I leave the gallery and the judge calls my name, tell him where I am and why. So that's how I accommodated the attorney thing. And then the ministerial thing is a bit more of a challenge because I'm up there in the pulpit and I can't get lost in the crowd as I can as an attorney. And if you've ever spoken at a church, or for the ministers out there, you know that the hymnist is the one who controls the flow of the worship service. So I walked up, explained my situation to the guy at the organ, and I said, if I abandon the pulpit, play another hymn. The congregation's not going to think anything of it. They'll think it's part of the program, and we'll be all right. So as a result of having to deal with these compromises, as I said, it's nothing heroic, but it is constant. Once I wake up, we're on. The game is joined, and every 5 to 15 to 45 minutes to an hour, I'm reminded of having to deal with this aggravation. And at a certain point, I don't know if it's I just threw my hands up or if I just came to see my energies would be better devoted to something else. So fairly early on this year, as I'm dealing with these side effects, I made the decision to surrender to truth, to surrender to the truth of my circumstance, the truth in being transparent, the truth in being vulnerable, the truth of humility, and what a burden was lifted. As you can tell, I'm quite open about that. Imagine yourself, for those who've never gone about it, tell people, including women, what you're going through. It's not something that we would normally do easily, but I have found it to be better. And I say, here's what I'm going through. And I've found people, to the last person, to be wholly accepting and accommodating and supportive. And I no longer have to make excuses for why are you dashing up. Usually, if you were to run into me on the town out in the middle of the week, I'm wearing the same trusty dark sweatpants with no zippers. I switched to sweatpants after I broke the zippers on my tactical pants in my urgency. So I got that, and usually I've got my shirt out, and they say, you look kind of sloppy. And I said, ask somebody who's had prostate cancer why every second saved is so valuable. But that's become my uniform as I get through it, and I make no bones about it. Here's where I am right now, and I hope you're able to walk that path with me, because that's what I'm dealing with. And if you're a friend, or if you're going to become a friend, and I made a lot of new friends during all this stuff, just sharing with them. But if you've ever been in one of my classes, Carrie there, we've been in a Sunday school class since 2006. And Carrie knows I don't go anywhere without Scripture. So as I'm considering humility, here's some of my go-tos from Philippians 2:3. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. Now, this is talking about if I valued self above others, I would be worried about my image. I would be conceited and want to maintain this facade, this visage that wasn't true. But if I value the friendship and relationship with those around me, then I can walk in humility and it's not a problem. Micah 6:8, I know, being students of BOA, most every one of you know this verse. Is what I call one of the Bible in miniatures. Micah 6:8, He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God? Now I say Bible in miniature because it's really got all the components that we need in this life. To the extent we're empowered, we can do justice. But as we do justice, we want to have the gloss of mercy always. And in everything, we want our walk with God to be one of humility. Why is that? If you're walking in humility, you can actually hear what God has to say to you. The next one, Proverbs 15:33. The fear of the Lord is instruction in wisdom, and humility comes before honor. And I thought, when we were in seminary, they talked a lot about the saints. They said, if you want to know how to comport your life, what things you need to do, look at the saints. Look at the martyrs. They are honored in the history of the church. But if anyone said, would you like to be a martyr or a saint? And you'd probably go, yeah, I'd like that a lot. And you'd say that until you read the history of what these folks did to earn that title. There's one guy we studied, Charles the Confessor. He's called Charles the Confessor because he would not stop proclaiming the truth of Christ. So they cut his tongue out. And they crippled his right hand so he could no longer speak or no longer write about Christ. So the honor that comes with serving Christ is very costly, but it's worth it. And then for my final verse, I think you go to the apostle. When you need a great verse, you go to the apostle. This is from 2 Corinthians 12:9. My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. So I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. So I look upon humility as finding myself almost through no efforts of my own, but finding myself in vulnerable surrender to Christ. That's what humility has come to, what I've come to know humility to be, which takes us to community. And this is in a relational religion with a Trinity Godhead. Community is everything. And I reflected on how humility takes away pride and leads to the blessing of communion with others. And that's where I go back to the saying, these things feed on to the next thing and inform, and then go back and forth. If you're humble, you've given up a burden of trying to impress people with how wonderful you are and to maintain that false self. And guess what? If you're totally transparent and it's just you and there's no pretense, people approach you. And they find it very easy to come into your ambit and to engage with you and to start that road towards community and deep community. And I look back at Beakley again and think his invitation was not just transparency, it was radical transparency. And I'm of the ilk that just goes with ordained ministry. I'm not saying it for everybody, and you do have to be careful who you're transparent with, but I think that I'm more inclined as a member of the clergy to be forthcoming about what's going on in my life, because my life is here to help one another, help others, to serve others, and that can accomplish that. So I tend to be more transparent than not. The other thing is that I've reflected on how suffering is an experience that knocks down barriers. And this was at a time I was going through training for the chaplaincy, and back in 2017, and we were going to have an exercise to write a paper. And in my experiences, I thought of this verse, Matthew 25. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, Truly I say to you, As you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. Now I'm looking around this group, and again, a fairly affluent, accomplished, educated crowd. It's probably not going to be the case that many or any of you are going to be hungry or thirsty, or you're an affable crowd. So if you're a stranger, you'll make friends quickly. Hopefully none of y'all have been naked. But of the two left, you're not going to be in prison, but is every single one of us is going to be touched by sickness. And as I was preparing the paper at Emory St. Joe's, one that I was fortunate enough to present to Emory Healthcare, I reflected on one day. I was making my rounds, and I had two patients in a row. One of them didn't speak English, and he was a janitor, and we had this little telephone that we'd use to communicate when we had someone who didn't speak English. And he was concerned. What's going to happen to me? Will this be painful? How long am I going to be here? And what am I going to carry out of here? How is my body going to be compromised? The next patient was a Superior Court judge at Fulton County. Same questions. How long am I going to be here? What am I going to carry out of here? I'm afraid. I want to comfort my family. What can I tell them? And my paper came to be, I called it a sacred and intimate moment. The chaplains training us said, when you walk through that door into a patient's room, you walk into a mystery. And you certainly walk into some of the most sacred and intimate moments in that patient and their family's life, especially if you're doing a dying process, which I think is the most important thing a chaplain does. If a patient is actively dying, we're called, sometimes you arrive and the patient has already expired. Sometimes you're in the final moments. The patient may be aware or they may not. And your job is to walk into this crowd of strangers and comfort them. And I thought, as horrible as the situation is, it illustrated to me the great power of a correct response to suffering, that of looking upon one another in the very deepest levels of our humanity, and being able to bridge that chasm and to speak to a patient, to speak to his family, human to human, and to communicate and show love for this person we've never laid eyes on before. The final note I have about community is about sin. I was at a church social, and Carrie knows this person. She comes up in the social and asks me what a good definition for sin is. Now, this is sort of stuff you get when you get ordained. You're at a party wanting to have a glass of wine, and somebody says, "Hey, can you tell me what sin is?" And fortunately, the Spirit was with me, and I said, sin is love of self over love of neighbor. Love of self over love of neighbor. And I look back and I think that's still a pretty darn good definition of sin. So from that respect, community serves a right nice utility in being an antidote. Community serves a right nice antidote to sin, because you can't be in community if you're being a jerk, if you're valuing yourself over those around you. So in sum, I say that blessedly, this experience has helped me in that the more others have reached out to me and shown that they care who and what I am and what I'm going through, the more I have been able to turn around and share that with them and others. Again, if you're humble and you engage in community, It's a wonderful thing, and I believe that community, that relationship, and I spoke about a Trinitarian Godhead. There was a theologian that said all of creation sprang forth from the love of the Trinity. So you can gather from that Trinity, ultimate, intertwined, interloving relationship is essential to us as Christians, is essential to our walk. So for me, it became a great signal that I needed to embrace this and grow from it and share it. So I look at community from the perspective of it removes the burden of the false self, and it opens us up to connecting in our humanity. And that brings us to the final, to gratitude. When I first was going through this and telling, the Sanhedrin up here, they all want to get in your business. So what's going on in your life? What's this experience all about? And I found myself with Ken, where we had a spare moment before the fellowship began, and I said, it's aggravating. It is truly aggravating as all get out to every 5, 15, 45 minutes or an hour and have to, oh gosh, get up, quit my legal work and go to the bathroom once more. But what really helped me through is I said, in a moment or two, I'm going to feel normal. I'm going to feel normal again. And I didn't really care if that normal is going to last for 5 minutes. A little aggravation when I get back in my seat and go, oh, no, please, not again. But 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 45 minutes, and living in that promise that being normal was right there for just a brief moment. And of course, Ken never misses an opportunity for a homily, right? And he reminded me how my experience was a microcosm of this earthly walk. And of course, we're talking about Hebrews 12. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? They discipline us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good in order that we may share in His holiness. And as Ken properly calls this, the greatest understatement in the Bible, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Can I get an amen?
Amen.
Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. And I think of something very penetrating to me. My group, my Sunday school group, who carries in there with me, gives me a hard time. I caught them betting one time on if I could go through the entire class without citing BOA. I'm big on attribution. I've been trained that way. But now, The Chosen, are y'all familiar with The Chosen? Season 3, Episode 8, and Carrie's over there mouthing Season 3, Episode 8. It's about the feeding of the 5,000 and the transformation of St. Peter, because he's used to being the number one guy, the leader of the pack, and better than anybody else. And Jesus, after preaching all day, said, Peter, take care of the flock. And Peter he was spoiled. He was pouting. And he says, why should I bother? If the master wants it done, all he has to do is command it, and it will get done. I'm not going to be able to do anything. And he went on there pouting and being self-absorbed. And later on, Jesus loads them into the boat, and they get out on the sea. And Jesus goes to prayer with the Father, and all of a sudden a storm kicks up. And then in the storm, because they're having a real tough time navigating their way through this awful storm, they see what they think is a ghost. walking across the water. And of course, they soon realize this is Jesus. So Jesus comes near the boat, and Peter, of course, wanting to take charge yet again, still operating kind of in pride, not kind of, very much in pride. Lord, I have given everything for you. Please call me to walk across the water, and I will do it. Show me, in effect, show me my investment has been good. And Jesus says, come, but keep your eyes on me. Come, but keep your eyes on me. And Peter gets out in the water. He does quite well for the first couple of steps. And then he hears a thunderclap on the right and a thunderclap on the left. And he takes his eyes off Jesus. And he sinks into the water. And Jesus reaches down and grabs him and pulls him up. And in a transformational moment, Peter is changed from a prideful, rebellious disciple of no good for building God's kingdom to somebody that might play a very important role in building the kingdom. And what touched me is that all the while, Peter, the rock upon which Jesus would ultimately build the church, is a sobbing little boy. Please don't let me go. Please don't let me go. Please don't let me go. And Jesus says, Peter, I have great things for you, but you're going to have to be tested. I have great things for you, but you're going to have to be tested. And then Jesus looks up and says, peace, be still. Peace, be still. And we all know this as Jesus rebuking the waves. But as I'm watching it, it dawned on me, Jesus is not talking just to the waves. He's talking to me. He's talking to every man in this room. Peace, be still. I have great things in store for you, but you must be tested. So, that was very informative to me about this whole notion of the true nature of gratitude. And for those of us well-trained, as all of us studying under BOA, we know the difference between happiness and joy. One of these is temporal, is fleeting, will abandon you in a heartbeat. Yet that's what folks strive for all the time. The other is enduring and is a product of the object of our faith, and it will not abandon you ever. And I think about happiness, and I've been blessed with, most of my friends are very, very successful, for better or worse. And it's kind of funny, the things that they look for, that they want to have their happiness. And in fact, I have a very good friend, Kerry knows him, and he's confided to me once that he felt to be quite unsuccessful in life because he did not yet have a jet. And I'll remind him when he needs, when he gets a little bit outside the bounds, I remind him that he says, hey, I'm no role model. But I'm reminded of that. And then another story, two guests were at a party in Manhattan, and the host had everything. They had, you look down from the top of the penthouse suite, and there's an ocean-going yacht. You look around, and every wall is adorned by an original painting. And the people there are the most beautiful people imaginable, the very heart of New York society. And one guy says, this fellow's got everything. And his friend says, I've got one thing he does not have. Enough. So that's happiness. And we compare it to joy. And this is where we return once again to the apostle. And if you read the Pauline epistles and have some flavor of what Paul is all about, see if you agree with me with the spirit in which Paul is talking about this. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressures of my concern for all the churches. Yeah, that's not the kind of life I would want to live. Yet if you know Paul, he's happy. He is filled with joy because he's reciting his bona fides for service unto the Lord. He's not complaining about the misfortune, the hardships he's enduring. He's saying, I love the Lord with every fiber of my body, and here's what I have endured because of my love. And the other one I liked is from Philippians 1:12-14. And I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything that has happened to me here has helped to spread the good news. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows that I am in chains because of Christ. And because of my imprisonment, most of the believers here have gained confidence and boldly speak God's message without fear. The dude's in prison, and he's happy. He is sitting in prison, and he is overwhelmed with joy because even in prison, the whole palace guard has received the message. That, my friends, is joy. It will not abandon you. It will not abandon me. It will carry us as far as Christ wants us to go. So in my suffering, what humble amount there is, but again, suffering is not competitive, I found purpose, and that purpose was living to love others. Total surrender, true purpose, true freedom, true joy. So in closing, I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. I'll say again that this year has brought much. And I said at the beginning, it's not my words, Ken was so kind as to give a great title, Shaped by Suffering. I claim to have been shaped by suffering in very specific ways. And how have these ways been shaped? Well, I know that experiencing humility has eliminated myself to me in a way that helps me put away the false self and surrender, as St. Peter did, to absolute dependency on Christ. I have been shaped in this way, and when I read this, I want each of you to receive this as you are the I in this statement. I know that I am loved by many, and deeply so. I am loved by many, and deeply so. And finally, I'm grateful to experience joy, the costly caring beyond self, to experience other-centered living, one immersed towards neighbor in respect and kindness that yield beauty. And the children of God said, Amen.
Amen.
So we've got 8 minutes.
Yeah, got time for
All right.
Q&A.
So any questions? Easy one. I haven't had coffee yet. Yeah.
I just have a comment, just kind of on my personal life. In the past 6 months, I've had some relationships that are in my extended family that I've had some suffering, maybe that I haven't experienced before, like some people that are really doing things that are detrimental to the family, I guess I might say. And I guess my number one takeaway is, because it's put me in a position of suffering, can't really solve their problems. My number one takeaway is that I'm experiencing God on a different level than I normally do. I don't like it. I don't want to suffer in this way, but it's deepened the God that I typically, same God, right? But just I've experienced Him in a deeper way, and I'm like, okay, God's more than I thought He was. It's pretty interesting. So I don't know that, I don't know if you've experienced it. I'm sure you have. But anyway, that just.
Oh, you're talking about my youngest brother. That's not good. My youngest brother. No, there have been some times in my family relationships, and I don't imagine for a second that I'm unique. I bet you pretty much any man here would tell you there are some people in the family that give them a challenge. And more than once I've gone to the apostle where he says, as far as it is up to you, be at peace with all men. As far as it is up to you, you don't have to take on a heroic sacrifice for somebody who doesn't want to hear the message. And the other thing I like is when, again, I've never had any formal training on counseling, but when I tell people, they ask me about these sort of things, I said 3 things you want to do in communicating with such a person. Be clear, be consistent, be compassionate. Clear, consistent, compassionate. Hope that answers your question. Yeah. Yes. Wow.
It just seems to me what you've said, Michael, is that in the fellowship of suffering with Christ, as He suffered, one can be in fellowship with others. It doesn't work the other way around.
And how so? How do you?
Well, if you relate to what he went through, then you can relate better with your fellow man. Fellowship, as it really is.
Right. We had a minister at Peachtree Road, Don Harp. I imagine a lot of you know him. He was great friends with Harrington, and he would often say, on each Sunday on any given pew, there's a heart a-breaking. And it's working with a lot of these Sunday school classes and Bible studies, I found out that people who appear like they've got everything going their way really have got tremendous challenges. So becoming acquainted with suffering and taking a candid view of what Christ actually did helps you understand where they might be coming from in the sacrifice. Somehow on my phone, they track your behavior, and I get a lot of stuff about puppies and a lot of religious stuff. And I saw this one thing that was a lot deeper than it at first cut seemed, and it said, if you knew when you were going to die, what would you do the day before you died? Jesus washed feet. Humility, service, right there before suffering. One more?
Questions?
When do you expect it?
Is there any way you can put this in a book?
If I wasn't so darn lazy. Every time I get inspired to write something, Ken's knocked out 3 or 4 more books. A few years back, a couple of us were arguing how many books Ken had written, and to show you the value of a divinity degree, I got tagged with counting them. At that time, it was 68. Now I think it's in the mid 70s. But yeah, I would from next year through my 70th year, I'm transitioning to full-time ministry, and that would be something I'd like to do. Raymond?
I was just going to ask, what is your prognosis for finishing treatment? Because you've been doing this a long time.
2 years is the run for the hormone therapy. When I came out of COVID, I gone from 5.3, let's keep an eye, to 9.6. We can't even do, on my PSA, we can't even do surgery. I am very delighted to say for some number of months now, my PSA is below 0.01. And I intend to keep it there. So praises to medical personnel. I remember when on campus at Emory and Duke, you can always tell the medical school people, they are so smart, but they're stymied by how to get into a door without getting germs on their hand. But thank God for those people, because it's so good to be able to take the load off and say they're going to get it done.